Okay, so we're about ready to get started on our quilt-a-long. But before I start with anything, before we start anything, I've cut up our strips for the foundation piecing. Yay! All different sizes. But before we start anything, what we want to do is change the needle. So I like to put in a new needle at the beginning of any project. I think this is important. It keeps us from snagging our fabric. Oh, wow, that wasn't in there very tight, was it? It keeps us from snagging our fabric. Now, one of the cool things about needles, and you might not know this, but needles have, you might have noticed, needles have, let's see, can you see this? Let's see if I can put something behind it maybe here. See these like color bands on the needle? Those color bands on the needle, those actually mean something. And we have a handy dandy needle guide on our blog on it seems like quilting.com, so that you can kind of identify your needles based on the color bands. But the thing to kind of know is that a lot, if they don't, like a universal needle won't have them. This is actually a sharp or a quilting needle, so it does have them. I don't know if you can kind of see the difference there, maybe a little bit. Anyway, so I actually keep my quilting needles because if I've just done a small project with them, I'll do 2 or 3 small projects quilting on my domestic with a quilting needle. But I don't want to piece with a quilting needle. It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary, and needles are expensive. So I am going to save my quilting needle, and then I use these like organ. I love these organ needles. They just come in these little packets. You get 10 per pack. This is an 80-12. It's just a really standard needle, but I want to put a new one in at the beginning of this project, especially because we're using a chambray. So chambrays, have this kind of wonderful quality to them because the warp and the weft. So the horizontal and the vertical fabric, or the vertical yarn, or the strings that make up the fabric, right? The warp and the weft. They're actually 2 different colors. And typically in a quilt cotton, you would have a standard warp and weft, like a white warp and weft, and then you would print the print cotton. So when you hear people talk about quilting cottons as prints, that's why, because you print the design onto the fabric. But with a chambray, or any other textile where the warp and the weft are different from each other, you get this really interesting texture effect. I'm talking and doing this at the same time, and not working with sharpened machinery while I'm talking is proving to be more challenging than I thought. But when you have a warp and a weft that are 2 different threads like that, that's what gives chambrays that kind of like iridescent quality. One of the greatest things about chambrays is that if you hold them in the light or you turn them like 90 degrees to each other, it feels like they change color a little bit, like they've got this pearly quality to them. Obviously it's not actually shiny, but when the light hits the chambray just right, you're gonna get this kind of like this movement, this visual movement to them, and I absolutely love working with them. But the thing with them is that they snag very easily. The Tilda chambrays actually do really well. They don't shed fray the way a lot of others do. And then we also carry a line in the shop from a company called Diamond Textiles that I absolutely love. And again, it's like a woven fabric that with a thicker yarn or a thicker string that doesn't fray, or doesn't fray as well or as much. They're all going to fray a little bit. You can use Fray Fix, and the other thing to do is to be really careful and cut them on the grain. I am not really careful, and I do not cut things on grain, but people who cut on grain swear by it, and someday maybe I'll develop the patience to do such a thing. But the great thing about chambrays is that they have that quality. The challenging thing about chambrays is that because they have a bit of a looser weave and they don't have those inks in that print holding the threads together, the warp and the weft together that way, they can snag, and they can snag and run a little bit easier. So one of the ways to prevent the snagging and the running is a really nice sharp needle, a well-tuned machine. But a sharp needle is going to really help make sure that it goes through the fabric like butter, and you're not going to get those snags and runs. So we are going to start with the Quilt-a-long, and it is Again, we're doing the Boho Baby. Boho Baby, just to catch you up. La la la. And we are actually, so you can see on the front that this is shown in kind of grays with a white background. We're actually doing a multicolor. We're going to do the Tilda chambrays, and we're going to do all of these arrows. There's actually 4. There's one you can't see. We're going to do these arrows in the same kind of denim-y color. And then these kind of feather type things here, this is actually what we're going to start with. So when we look at the pattern, the first thing that you do is you make these kinds of feathery, the quiver, so to speak. And is that what it's called? It's called the quiver? I don't remember. So I think it's, yeah, I think that's right. No, the quiver is the thing that holds the, whatever. This is what we're making. We're making the feather part. So the way that the instructions have you do this is that it's a foundation pieced, because you're sewing together such thin strips. So the directions say to go from 3/4 of an inch to 2.5, and really warn you that yes, a wider strip will actually make the feathers faster, but it actually won't look so much like feathers. So you want thinner strips mixed in with wider strips. And it's, you might have heard of foundation piecing, and you might have heard it referred to as foundation paper piecing or paper piecing, but we are not going to be using paper. There's no papers that come with this kit. Instead, or come with this Quilt-a-long, or come with this pattern. Instead, we are going to be using non-fusible, lightweight interfacing. So you can foundation piece on muslin, you can foundation piece on other fabric. You don't have to have it be something that you tear away. The reason I think paper, because you want to print something on paper, well, we don't have to print anything. We're just going to go at a 45-degree angle. So all we've done then is we have cut out our pieces of interfacing, and this interfacing is a lightweight. This is a lightweight interfacing, and there's not fusible. There's no adhesive on this interfacing, and that's really important. If you try this technique with fusible interfacing, you're going to ruin your iron. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a 45-degree angle on this piece of interfacing, and then we're going to lay our first strip on there. Stay tuned. Okay, so I've lined up my large, so it's a 13.5-inch piece of interfacing, and I do not have a square ruler large enough. So what we're doing is we're lining up. You can see that the ruler's at an angle here. We're lining up on this 45-degree line on the ruler, and we're lining it up with the corner here. I've got my marking pen ready to go. You can see very clearly that I'm not really using the marking on the cutting mat at all. I'm using the markings on the ruler lined up against the piece. But then what I do when I've got something that's longer is I actually use a second ruler and I stack them up, right? Because the acrylic edges are nice and straight. I can get a nice straight edge here. I can hold it down right in that corner, and then that allows me to go all the way through, and I'm not like moving this bottom ruler at all. So that's how I do that. Other people do this differently, but that's how I get a 45-degree angle or a marking on a piece that's bigger than I have a ruler for. Okay, so I've marked my 45-degree line on my interfacing, and now I'm laying down the first strip just butted up against that line. So what we're actually going to do here is very similar to what you think about paper piecing. Is we're going to line up, and again, it's going to be hard to tell because we're going to do this right sides together. So we're gonna put this first piece down with the wrong side down or the right side facing up. So again, with a chambray, you're not really gonna be able to tell because the front and the back are the same. That actually makes this a little bit easier. But with a print, you definitely be able to tell because you'd want the print side up. And then for the second strip, we want the print side down or the wrong side. So we want these right sides together. So what we're gonna do here is we're actually going to just stitch right down this line, and we're just gonna stitch to this interfacing. We're just gonna stitch right to it. And so we're gonna stitch down this line, open this up, press it. And this is why we don't want this to be adhesive, because we're gonna keep pressing every strip, right? So we're gonna open this up, press it, put another one on, open that up, press it, put another one on. And so we're basically just starting from the center line, and we're going in one direction. And then when we come back and we're done with that half, we're gonna go flip this around and we're gonna go in the other direction off of this same center line. Now I could line this up so that it's actually in the middle, or like it kind of goes over that center line. But I don't want that look. I want, because what that would do is when I cut this, because I'm gonna cut this on the diagonal, that would mean that I have the same fabric and the same width of fabric at that kind of that middle junction point, and I don't want that. I want different fabrics. So I'm gonna line it up on the 45. I'm gonna lay this down on there, right sides together. So the right side of the first one is up and the right side of the second one is down. I'm gonna pin this to the back like this, one-handed. Yeah, very successful. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just stitch down this line, open that up, press it, and just keep going. Okay, so I've got the first half. Oh, what happened? A little water. Okay, I got the first half done. So you can see again, it's, well, now that it's heat pen, right? So where the heat hit. Okay, so we have our first half done. So we're going to now flip this around. I'm right-handed, so I flip things so that I'm sewing on the right side. But we're going to flip this around, and now we're going to do exactly the same thing but going in this direction, so going to this side. So I'm going to grab from the pile here, and I'm not going to want to repeat exactly the order of the colors or the sizing from the previous side. So you can see this one was a little bit wider. I'm grabbing that color but in a narrower strip. So the challenge here is that, of course, nothing is perfectly random, right? But our eyes are going to want to find patterns in things. And so if I make a pattern, whether it's intentional or not, in the order of the colors or what color comes after which, or the width of things, or how many skinny and how many wide, and if I do that, our eyes will find it very quickly and easily. So again, nothing is truly random, but we can do our best. And so we can vary up or create variance in our choices so that we have more of that random visual for the eye. So now all I have to do is sew this strip on, flip it over, press it, and then keep going all the way to the end. And then once that's done, I'm going to trim this up. All right, so that is done, and I'm super excited about it. Totally love it. So the next step is to get this trimmed up. So we started with a 13.5-inch piece of interfacing. We're going to trim this to 12.5 inches. Now I could just grab my 12.5-inch square ruler, smack it, right on top, and find a spot there. But what I really want to do is I really want to keep this vertical or this diagonal correct. So we're going to cut this, trim this down, and then we're going to subcut it to make the two sides of the feathers for the arrow. So as we're lining this up, I really want to line it up carefully on the 45 against the seam. So again, I'm not lining it up to like the edge or even the interfacing on the back. I'm lining it up to that seam, and then I'm making sure that I've got plenty of clearance all the way around, and then I'm double checking that it says 12.5 inch square, because the last thing I want to do is cut it to the wrong size and have to start over again. So 12.5 inches, and then we're going to, according to the instructions, cut it down from there. So I'm gonna go do that, trim that up, and then I'll take a picture once all done. And there she is. So I'm gonna, the hard part's gonna be getting the second one to go the other way. So I'm gonna have to really be careful when I cut it to make sure that the angle is going in the opposite direction, because we want these things to kind of hit at that 45. But I am so excited. I think they're great. I think, honestly, they're giving me a little Easter. But I think once they're all together in the quilts, it'll be super, super cute. I think, yeah, I'm at that point, you have that point when you are making a quilt where you're like, oh, is this really going to look good? And this is that point right here for me, because it's definitely throwing off Easter. But the pile of strips doesn't throw off Easter. So I know I'm in a good spot. And then these are going to be against this like denim background, with a white arrow. So it's going to be that's going to pull it back a little bit and give it less of that Easter vibe and more of that kind of boho chic vibe that we are going for with the Boho Baby quilt. So stay tuned, but that's how you do this first feather step and the foundation piecing. Next week we are going to work on cutting the rest of the arrows and putting those together.